Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Cold Red, our favorite podcast. And with me for tonight, as always, is the wonderful Dr. Ray Carr. Hello, Ray.
Jim, how are you? It's good to see you again.
I am doing fine. And what are the odds we have two doctors on the show tonight? We're also here with Dr. Rob Leonard, a linguist extraordinaire out of Hofstra University. And like Ray and I, who have worked together over the years, Ray and I are very friendly. Rob and I have worked together over the years, and we're very friendly. So not just professional association here, but personal association. So, Rob, great to have you on Cold Red.
Thanks. Great to be here.
So, you're the first linguist or forensic linguist we've had as a guest on the show. I guess I'm the built-in one along with Profiler, but it'll be interesting to have you walk us through a little bit of your life and your career. But I know it's no surprise when people want to know a little bit about your past, including back into your college days. And when I was introducing our last episode, I mentioned the next guest is not only a linguist, but a former rock and roller. So, Rob, give us a little bit up front here of how the whole Sha Na Na thing started.
Sure. So I was in college in a college singing group. I was at Columbia College, and there was what would now be an a cappella singing group called the Columbia Kingsmen. And we would play in blazers, and we played mostly across the street at the hospital ward for people who needed help, or girls' schools, and that was about it. And then one day we were asked to perform on campus, and we didn't have enough songs, so we did 50 songs, doo-wop. Now, this is before any revival of doo-wop. This is before Happy Days or the Grease movie.
American Graffiti.
Right, or any of that. Oh, absolutely.
So this is a 66, 67 time frame?
Yeah, right. So this actually happened in 69. But we had been singing doo-wop to ourselves because there was good harmony, and there wasn't a lot of good harmony in rock and roll at that point. So we did some 50s doo-wop, and the audience went crazy. And my brother told me, Rob, call the boys to your apartment. I was the leader of the group. And I said, why? He says, I have something to say to them. Okay, so I called them all to my apartment on 118th Street. And he said, boys, and he went around the room pointing at everybody in their face. He says, I am going to make you rock and roll stars. So here's my 23-year-old brother, and they all looked at each other and said, yeah, sure, George. Okay. And he said, no, let me explain. And he turned us into a 1950s group. Took off our blazers, dressed us like what the press used to call faux thugs, with T-shirts with the camel pack or Lucky Strike under your T-shirt shoulder, and choreographed like 25 songs. We found Bye Bye Birdie costumes in a costume rental place across the river. And three of us dressed in gold lame like Elvis Presley did, and learned a special. My brother had been taking dance the whole time, and we always would go to the Apollo Theater on 125th Street and see the soul singers, and they were the most fabulous dancers. So we worked up an act, and it just hit. Everybody just couldn't believe it. They loved it. It was the music of their childhood, and it was a return to a time when, like right now, the country is divided, right? Tremendously divided, but it's nothing compared to what the country was divided with in 1968, because every single male stood a very good chance of going to Vietnam. 25 guys that I went to school with died in Vietnam. So this was like a return to some Garden of Eden a make-believe, apolitical, just, playground. And that indeed, if you notice, is what's in the Grease movie and all of that. But we invented that. My brother invented it. Even the word grease was not used for, we were called hoods or JDs, juvenile delinquents or something back in those days. And my brother was in literature class, and the professor said, yes, the great poem, the grandeur that was Rome, the glory that was Greece. And my brother said, that's the title for our outdoor concert.
How about that?
So everybody in the colleges loved it. But now what we're going to do. So a couple of guys went around to all the clubs in New York and said, would you like us to play? And they all said, are you out of your freezing minds? 1950s revival? Get the hell out of here. Except one club. And we didn't know it then, but it was half owned by Andy Warhol, the master of avant-garde. And we were avant-garde. We were super ahead of the pack. Remember, nobody even breathed 50s revival yet. And we played there. And it was called Steve Paul's The Scene. And it was the most inside nightclub in all of New York. And all the stars, all the big rockers and everybody would go there. People didn't have entourages in those days. They just go there to hang out if they had nothing else to do. And I met Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix. We performed one night, and I go, answer, Teen Angel, answer me, please. I go down on my knees. I look up, and not 6-7 feet away, it's a tiny place, Jimi Hendrix is jumping up and down on a chair, clapping and screaming, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I hung out with him the whole night. Nicest guy in the world. Taught me how to drink tequila, with the salt and the lime. And really nice guy. And this guy tried to sell him a stolen camera that he had under. No kidding. We're in the men's room, and this guy follows us, and he says, Jimmy, you want to buy this camera? What do I buy this camera for? But he says, look, man, it's clear the thing's hot. So just put it away, put it back where you got it or something. You don't want to. He actually gave him a little talk about your mother wants to see you in jail, or if you have kids and stuff. And he gave the guy $20, which was a lot of money then. And he's just the nicest, most generous guy in the world. And it was he who got us into Woodstock. I mean, we were brand new. And even though we had a nice groundswell of the press, so one night, and it was the last night that Steep Fall scene was ever in existence, because organized crime shut it down that night for non-payment of dues. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So we finish our set, and I go into the postage stamp size dressing room, and I see a super stoned hippie right out of Central Casting with little pinwheels for eyes, stoned out of his brain, flashing me the peace sign, hair below his shoulders. And he says, you guys, and doesn't say anything more. I said, oh, it's so nice of you. And I took him and I frog marched him a little bit out to the door, and I was gently pushing him out when our manager came in, a friend of my brother's, and said, no. And we all three of us went down. He picked up the other guy. He was the booker for Woodstock. So he stands up, the stoned hippie stands up and completes his sentence. You guys have to be at Woodstock. And I said to our manager, what's Woodstock? He says, I don't know, but I guess we'll find out. And that night, the mob closed the place. They tear gas, you name it. And it was a really interesting place. It was downstairs. It was like off 8th Avenue, 48th. Terrible, terrible neighborhood. And I never saw any enormous bouncers. I just couldn't figure it out. And the manager, a great guy named Teddy, he and I would sit and he talked to me. I was 19 or 20. And I said, I don't get it. Where are your bouncers? And he says, oh, okay, wait. I'll show you. Hey, Louie. He calls over Louie. Louie's this guy around 5'8". And he's from the Philippines. And I said, yeah, so Louie's the bouncer? He says, yeah, he's a sap man. I say, he's a sap man? Yeah. He says, show Rob. And yeah. So he extends his arm, and a leather sap, blackjack, appears in his hand.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, so we don't want out and out fights around here, but like, let's say some big guy is roughing up his girlfriend. So Louis goes over to him and says, oh, sir. And he puts his hand behind the guy's head, right on the back of his head. And Louis taps me on that part of my head. I almost passed out. Says, and the guy will crumple. And then we take a couple of waiters and climb up the stairs, and that's how we keep peace. So then they amuse themselves teaching me how to use the sap on the back of a guy's head and hiding it in my sleeve. I mean, it was like really something from a Humphrey Bogart movie, you know?
And as a reminder here, you're a full-time college student at Columbia.
That's right.
Are you a linguistics major at this point?
Yeah, more or less. I was very interested in languages. Yeah.
And folks, we will get into language crimes and all that stuff, but this part you're going to be continued fascination with. So somehow you wind up going to Woodstock, and you open for Hendrix early one morning.
That's right. Yeah. We were supposed to go on midnight, and they was so late. We wound up going on like at 7 a.m, having spent the entire night on stage. So instead of my "oh baby," it was "oh baby." It was, but by then nobody cared, I think. And so that was really an experience. And then we played the Fillmore East, the Fillmore West. I used to be out in the Fillmore West drinking wine with Janis Joplin. Janis Joplin always had wine, and she never took drugs, unlike everybody else in the entire Fillmore West except her and me, which is why I am still here. And I would drink her wine. It never occurred to me to buy my own wine. I don't know. So we'd be backstage and we'd be drinking wine, and she was always complaining to me about the lack of male groupies. And I said, gee, Janis, I don't know what to say about that. Oh, and so Janis was really kind and nice too. And we played with Santana and the Kinks, the Grateful Dead many, many times, B.B. King, Albert King, Little Richard. Imagine that in Detroit, the whole bill was B.B. King, Little Richard, and Sha Na Na. How is that for a mixed bill, huh? Great.
Wow. Get much better than that.
That's right.
And Rob, during this time, you picked up sort of an unusual language, and you chose that as your sort of required language in linguistics for a very sort of pragmatic reason. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it wasn't given on Mondays or Fridays. So we were so popular. Listen, a real overnight success. I mean, we were the only real overnight success group I've ever met. So we would fly away on Thursday and come back on Tuesday. And in those days, you're supposed to go to school 5 days a week. And out of 55 languages taught at Columbia, only one was not given Monday through Friday, and that was Swahili, East African Bantu language. And as I love telling my students, after now I've taught Swahili in university level all over the world for, 4 decades. I said, the day I walked into Swahili class, I couldn't even found Africa on a map. That's how little I knew about it. But I wound up, when I quit the group, I got a fellowship from Columbia, and I got a Fulbright fellowship, and I was supposed to go to East Africa for a year and travel around in sailing dhows on the East African coast, visiting various villages and learning the local dialects up by the Somali border. And I stayed 4 or 5, and I wound up running a research center there. So never in a million years did I think, back when my brother said, I'm going to make you boys rock and roll stars, that I'd wind up being a Swahili expert. And I wrote my doctoral dissertation on it at Columbia.
Wow. Let me ask you a question, Rob.
Sure.
Time magazine listed you as the number 2 of the top 10 smartest rock stars.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to get an attorney to sue them.
Well, who's number 1?
Oh, he's the guitarist for Queen. He's an astrophysicist.
Get out of here. That's unbelievable. And then you made another statement. You said not too many people in this world can say that they
Hey,
work with the FBI and Grateful Dead.
that's right. With both the FBI and the Grateful Dead. I mean, for all I know, I'm the only one.
Oh, yeah, but was there really a difference?
Well, the Grateful Dead didn't go by acronyms.
Oh, there you go. Okay, there you go. That's. I find that amazing, fascinating. I can't believe
I
it.
find it pretty absurd myself, Ray. I'll tell you.
Yeah, the guitarist from Queen was an astrophysicist.
Yeah, he was before. Oh, gee,
Wow.
I can't remember his name. Or a very good astrophysicist too. I think Time was just more impressed with astrophysics than forensic linguistics. It sounded, you know. So I only made number two, but I'm going to sue them eventually.
Yeah, you would have gave him a run for his money, Rob. I know you would. You would.
So bring us up. So obviously, at some point, Sha Na Na thing was fun for a few years, but you said, yeah, for future purposes, because there was a TV show later, but you had
Yeah.
nothing to do with that, right?
Hey, no, and the group was the band in the Grease movie, the sock hop band
That's right.
in the Grease movie.
That's right.
Oh no, I could have continued, but everybody I knew started dying of drug overdoses,
hmm
and it sort of took the fun away. Jimi then died of a drug overdose. Janice, who we were all sure never took drugs, died of a drug overdose. Our own lead guitarist, I think one more year, he died of a drug overdose.
Wow.
And, like a lot of businesses, when you know it too close up, it isn't as attractive as it might be. And at just that moment, Columbia said to me, we accept you into the graduate school and we will give you all paid tuition, stipend. You don't have to teach even, which is rare, all the way through to the PhD. And I said, oh, I'm never going to be able to get this again. Yeah.
No.
So as you said, Jim, that was an opportunity for the long term that I just couldn't pass up.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, some of us did that a little bit later in life, like Ray and I getting our advanced degrees, but you got it early and over with, and you actually put a rock star aspect of your life on hold. And so that's a very interesting story. And Rob, I'm going to ask you, do you remember how you first contacted me? And when I was in the FBI, and I had not heard of you before. Tell your version of the story, then I'll kind of tell mine.
Yeah, right. I had been interested in forensic linguistics, and I had done some cases. I don't think I'd done any. I know that the first case that you helped me with, for example, the Hummert murder, I hadn't testified in the murder trial, but I was really interested in the application of linguistics to forensic sciences. And Roger Shai was my mentor in that. And he was encouraging me to get involved. And then came the anthrax case, and Benji Wall, my mentor from Columbia, and I were very, very interested in the anthrax case and analyzing the language evidence. And I guess we were both on a listserv, and I reached out to you and I said, is anybody at the FBI interested in what two linguists might have to say about that? And as I remember you telling me lately, that the FBI was not interested in linguists at that moment. I mean, that was something that you really were astonishing at. I mean, you showed the FBI the real utility of forensic linguistics with the Unabomber case, but it didn't seep into all areas still.
Yeah, and so from my version of that story, we both belong to the then and now the International Association of Forensic Linguists. We're on a listserv, and I guess our names were going, back and forth. And all of a sudden, I get a cold email one day, Ray, on the FBI, I think academy.edu back then. I know the email addresses have changed. Robert Leonard, Hofstra University. Hello, Jim. I'm a linguist at Hofstra, and I know this anthrax case hasn't been solved. Would you be interested in my help? Contact me here, blah, blah, blah. I said, huh. So I go to one of our analysts, Helene Varsos, and I said, you went to Hofstra, right? Yeah. I said, you had a professor, or I had a professor reach out to me just, an hour ago. And His name's Rob Leonard. Do you know him? Oh, Rob Leonard. Yeah, he's a linguist. He's a great instructor. He really knows his stuff. He was one of my favorite, professors of all time. And she's only about in her maybe mid-20s at this point. I said, oh, okay. Well, I guess he sounds legit. And like as an afterthought, oh, yeah, and he was in this big rock band back in the day. I said, wait, a professor, linguist, in a rock band? That's kind of unusual. What was the band? And she goes, oh, hold on. I can't remember. Hold on. It begins with an S. Okay. Steppenwolf. No. Steve Miller Band. No. Spiral Staircase. I'm thinking all the different venues and genre, I should say. And finally she goes, Sha Na Na. So, of course, our listeners already know and our audience knows how it turned out to be. So, oh, yeah, I remember Sha Na Na. Yeah, the TV show. Yeah, and of course, I found out later you weren't involved in the TV show. But so anyway, we get in touch on email, and I said, all right, hey, Rob, nice to meet you. We may have had a phone call. And you said you're willing to devote your time to the several writings involved in the anthrax case, which now this is about 2004-ish, 2005-ish. The case is still unsolved. And Ray, I've had some problem with the FBI in recent years, but that always stuck in my craw how the original task force for the Amerithrax case just really, they blew that. And we'll save that for some other podcast. But I do reach out for them and say, hey, I have this linguist, this professor, he's willing to help out. Anything you want. Of course, I'm a linguist. I can help out. And the guy gets back to me after a few emails, the task force member says, we were going to forward Rob's email to the head of the task force. He said, yeah, he doesn't do emails. And this is like 2005. I said, wait, the head of this Amerithrax task force doesn't do emails. Well, he does the FBI ones that he has to, but that's it. How about phone calls? Well, he's not going to take a phone call from a professor he doesn't know. I said, you know what? And they already didn't want me in the task force for some reason.
I'm not shocked.
Because the profilers went up and said, it's not this guy, this biochemist they had as a suspect, and it's someone else, not him. And they didn't like that, and they made that guy's life hell. It's all in my fourth book coming out in a few months. But anyway, so this is how Rob and I met. And then I said, sorry, Rob, they don't want me or you. And Rob's probably saying, that's a little bit odd, even though my success with Unabomb and other cases. But there was a whole personality thing up there.
Well,
we won't
Jim,
get into
it's
that.
not really odd because you know what? Forensic linguistics, even though that was used in helping to solve the Unabomb case, it was something that was foreign to everybody. Nobody actually even knew. If you said statement analysis, that's one thing. But when you say forensic linguistics, people go, what the heck is that?
They still do, of course.
Exactly, they do. And I'll tell you, since Jim left, I think you left in 2009, right, Jim? From the Bureau? 2007. Well, Jim leaves in 2007, and I don't think anybody really picked up the torch, Jim. I really don't think they did. I know, you had the CSTAT program. I don't think that ever went anywhere. I know Andre Simmons tried to do something with that. But yeah, there were some issues with forensic linguistics in general. People didn't know the value of it. And they still don't. Rob, you're exactly right. They still, to today, don't understand the value of what forensic linguistics
I often will get a call from a lawyer or an investigator or an agent, and they say, I knew that there was an kind of expertise that could help me with this case. And they sort of congratulate themselves, as they should, because they figured it out. And why shouldn't there be? But, when I was an undergraduate, I didn't even know there was such a thing as linguistics. But there is a whole science that has been going for, more than 100 years, where people can get a PhD in linguistics at virtually any major university. I mean, and as I always say, what in the law is not language? Everything is language.
Exactly.
And we forensic linguists, know what's under the hood. Race car drivers, they can operate really well. Judges and lawyers, they can speak really well. But the race car driver does not know about the physics of the internal combustion engine, nor does that person need to. But we do. And we have a whole different toolkit that we bring. So like Jim with the Unabomb case, I mean, the fantastic authorship analysis, Roger with the demographics of it. I mean, we can narrow down the suspect pool if we're getting threats. I mean, this is a really, really useful kind of science. but of course it can be applied to just about anything. I mean, I was Apple's linguist against both Microsoft and Amazon in their defense of their trademark App Store. I worked for the Prime Minister of Canada, for all these Fortune 550 companies who deal with contract disputes, copyright, trademark, plagiarism, and a lot of true crime and murders and like that, of course.
Well, there's a great question. When we talk, and you and Jim, and I kind of know the answer to this, but I don't think our audience does. What kind of cases does a forensic linguistic person actually get involved in? Can you give I know you and Jim were involved in some cases together, but what are the general cases? Is it all homicides? Is it rapes? What is it you guys get involved in?
It can be, well, you want to talk for a bit, Jim, about your cases?
I'll start it, but I'd like you then to take over at some point. Sure. So if anyone who knows me and now they're learning about Rob Leonard, we came into linguistics in different ways. For me, it was trial by fire. It basically the biggest authorial analysis case, probably to this day, certainly in a criminal case. And I had to kind of invent my own way through it. And then I all of a sudden became the expert, Ray. You know how it is. You're successful in a case in the FBI. I'm going to say I was lucky. I'm going to say any agents would be lucky, but you apply everything you know from your experience, your education, and things come together. Whether you like it or not, then you become the Bureau's expert. So I was working more cases even after Unabomb, and I was actually testified for the first time in a stalking case up in northern New Jersey. It was a federal case. And, the defense attorney really did his best to rip me across, rip me in every way he could, because I didn't have any formal training. I had a master's in psychology, but no formal training in linguistics. So we won that case. It was upheld on appeal, everything. Bad guy got put in prison. But before I got off the stand that day, I said, I'm going back to school. I believe in linguistics. I didn't even really call it that then. I called it text analysis, although I certainly knew about linguistics and forensic linguistics. But I said, I'm going back to school, and I found Georgetown University right in the D.C. area. The Bureau kind of gave me a scholarship. I went back and forth to classes twice a week, the old-fashioned way, driving an hour up and an hour back, and then still working cases in the meantime. I was probably the only person on campus carrying a weapon, at least under my jacket or sport coat or in my old fanny pack. But now I'm working for the FBI, so I'm only working criminal cases and only for the prosecution, both state and federal level. So, but of course, there's a whole other world out there of forensic linguistics. And then I eventually got my degree in 2005. I didn't officially call myself a linguist until then. But I'm still working criminal cases. But Rob, you were working criminal cases. We can get into maybe your first big one was Hummert, but you were certainly working some of these trademark cases. And people around the world, there's linguists that do asylum cases. There's a lot of borders in Europe where people come across and they don't know if they're real refugees or have been, harassed by the other government. And they actually test them for their dialect features. And there are some linguists that have very, very specific skill sets. They can tell if someone's from, Eastern Slovakia or Western Slovakia and have tracked their reference.
A real problem with that. When we were at Aston in Birmingham in, 2011? For that conference, a guy gave a presentation about the asylum, and I said that, as somebody else was supposed to have said, I spent a long time in East Africa, and I know that there are dialects spoken in areas that were terrorized by Swahili and by Somali Shifta, which are bandits who come across the border. And those people migrated down or tried to get out of the country because nobody wanted them. And if they spoke their dialect, they felt like there were bumpkins, country bumpkins. People didn't want to speak those dialects. Kids who spoke those dialects to me when I was on their islands were ashamed to say it when they saw me in the city. So imagine these people being interviewed by a Swahili speaker who was not a linguist. And he says, they're not speaking that dialect. They are probably lying. They're not from there. See, so I really, really tried to instill in those people the importance of having people who are scientists and not just going by the seat of their pants. Yeah. So we do a lot of training so that, I mean, Jim and I, gosh, we've trained so many different agencies. And do you remember we were on Statue of Liberty? Gosh. Anyway,
we slept overnight in separate rooms on the Statue of Liberty Island. I guess is that Governor's Island? And
no, the island, and they came
Liberty
and
Island, that's right.
Tour. Yeah.
And it was so cool. We had to bring our own pillows and sheets, I remember. But
Yeah.
I say to sleep on the Liberty
Wow.
Island was really cool. And then we did the training the next day. So that was.
Do you remember
nice
when
event.
they came at an evening and they said, "Hey, you guys want a tour of Lady Liberty?" And we said, "Sure." So we had a private tour, just Jim and me, and we were standing on the apron, and one of them said that his friend had been on duty 9/11. I just listened to your episode on 9/11, guys. Maybe you weren't standing next to me, Jim. I don't remember. Do you remember this? He said that his friend said that the second plane was coming straight at them at the Statue of Liberty. And at the very last moment, it went up and into the second tower. And they hypothesized, remember, it was like 9, it was early. And they hypothesized that it was because sometimes there's lines of people snaking around, thousands of people waiting to get into the Statue of Liberty. And when the terrorists saw that there was nobody there, they went to their secondary target. Pretty astonishing.
You know, that's the first time I've ever heard that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are listening. I never knew that. I mean, they're saying the same thing. I never knew that. Oh, my God.
Well, we heard it from a guard. I mean, we have no reason to doubt him. And he heard his friend, his coworker who was there. So it's probably very true. Yeah. But to go back to the applications of forensic linguistics, well, you did a good job on on those guys' analysis, Jim. God, I mean, Jim and I have taught so many times together. I probably remember a lot of your cases and your analyses better than you do, Jim. But like right now, there's IARPA, the Director of National Intelligence, right? IARPA is Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Activity. They have a linguistic fingerprint project, and I'm a senior consultant, and people that Jim knows very well is also on that task force. I work cases with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. I did training for the NYPD Homicide Detectives Training Unit. Worked for, 5 or 6 U.S. attorneys, different districts. And then of well-known cases, I got dragged very late into the John Benet Ramsey case, which, of course, Jim knows from beginning to end. And the Coleman triple homicide, and trying to figure out who were making death threats to sitting judges. And actually, I had a case, I don't know if I even told you about this, Jim, where a guy was making threats to FBI agents who's going to shoot them. And then he said, I'm going to shoot their families. And then he said, I'm going to shoot anybody who delivers packages to FBI headquarters in a particular city, including workers who aren't even doing the actual delivering. But in any event, if, in other words, if the post office delivers or FedEx, I'll just go out and shoot FedEx or post office workers. So that's the kind of cases that I get a lot more than I would like, I must say, because there's a lot of crazy people out there.
You mentioned Hummert a few times, and I played a sort of an indirect role in that case. I think that was 2006, 2000.
Yeah.
It was an interesting case where you were going to give expert testimony, but the prosecutor wasn't real sure the judge would buy it. So you enlisted me, and the prosecutor enlisted me to come to York County, Pennsylvania. Tell us the story from there. Tell us about the case itself.
Sure. So there's a great forensic files on this. I'm one of 3 experts. It's called A Tight Leash. this woman's husband found a letter on his windshield saying, this is the proof your wife is of bad moral character. And he went into some detail in other language. He says, I had an affair with her. She was, this, that, and the other thing. And then she told my fiance, and my fiance had an abortion, and she wouldn't, and the time is right for payback. Now I'm back in town. So, of course, everybody's terrified. And
so the woman finds this on her, or no, who finds this on?
Her husband finds it on his windshield.
And he reports it to the police, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And shows it to her. And they have more police patrols, but everybody's terrified. She says, I don't know who that person is. And in the letter is what used to be called a glamour shot of her, all made up, holding a rose. And she went to some studio in her town and had this. And the letter said, who'd she do this for? I guess not you. She must be having affairs. So she is, a very low moral character. And then she's found strangled, ligature, in her car outside a supermarket. So the police are investigating. There's physical evidence that points perhaps to the husband. And as the whole thing gets going, a second letter comes, this time to the press and to the chief detective, that says, you're looking in the wrong place. I killed her. Wasn't her husband. I'm a serial killer. This is the fifth woman I killed. I'm getting good at it. So I don't know any of this, but the Pennsylvania State Police major crimes guys come to me and they say, we'd like you to look at some letters. I said, okay. What can you tell us about whoever wrote these letters? And again, Dr. Benji Wald, who was my mentor at Columbia, and he was a UCLA professor at that point, he and I analyzed the letters. And the police didn't tell me, but I assumed that they thought that as different as these letters looked, one was typed, it was all sorts of real detail, it was well written more or less, and the second one was scrawled on a piece of paper and it had apparent mistakes and things like that. I figured that maybe they thought it was from the same person. And in looking at it hard, we found that there was a very rare rhetorical device. In the first letter, he said, I would have liked to have found out. She made sure my fiancé found out. And in the second letter, she wanted to break it off, so I broke her neck. And this reusing the same verb for ironic, cruel humor stood out to me. And I said, gee, maybe this is something that everybody does, and I'm just not aware of it. But I checked with the Latin teachers, the Greek teachers, and they said, no, this isn't pretty idiosyncratic as far as we know. And they sent me to Brigham Young University, where there's a guy who was a keeper of this enormous thesaurus, you might say, of rhetorical devices of all things. I had barely known what a rhetorical device was when I got into this. And he said, no, I've never seen this. We don't even have a word for it. So I said to the judge in an affidavit, this is a rare thing. We find it in these two apparently different letters. And he gave us a search warrant. And then we got all of the writings of the main suspect, who was the husband. And spoiler alert, we were able to show that he wrote both of those. And the jury said that the first one clearly showed premeditation. So he's doing life without parole.
And an interesting case where I was brought in sort of as a...
yes, of course.
In the pre-trial motion, the prosecutor requested me, still an FBI profiler, supervisory special agent. I came up to York County and testified, not to the case itself. I just laid out the sort of the generic testimony about what is linguistics, what is forensic linguistics, which of course Rob could do just as well, if not better. But they also wanted to hear my experience with Unabomb, other cases in which I've testified, in which there had been convictions. The judges had allowed this testimony. So all I did was lay out sort of the law and court precedent, legal precedent around the U.S. And then the judge, based on that alone, finally, then I think you testified next about the specifics of the case, much of which you just shared. And next thing you know, the judge allowed you to testify in the trial itself, and it wound up in a conviction.
Yeah, that's how I passed the fry. And when all this was happening, I told the prosecutor, wait a minute, why don't we ask Jim to come up and he can put the stamp of, yes, this is the kind of analysis that the BAU does. I mean, you can't get a better recommendation than that. And
it's very smart. Very smart.
And real quick, you mentioned, one second, you mentioned Fry, which is related to Daubert, just so our audience knows. These are court decisions, Supreme Court, et cetera, that sort of are sort of the umbrella over what experts can testify to certain expertise in certain court proceedings. We don't have to get into the weeds on that, but the Fry decision, Daubert, there's even Kumho Tires along with that about how certain experts can testify. I love if you watch the movie My Cousin Vinny, the girlfriend comes up. She wasn't a PhD or anything in that regard, but she knew cars. So under Fry or Daubert, technically, if she can prove her experience in that regard, she would be allowed to testify. So
but course, we teach an expert witness course now with the law school, and the law school professor insists on showing that clip from My Cousin Vinny to every incoming guest. They use it all over the place in law schools because the advisor was had just graduated law school or something there.
That is a great clip. But you know what, Jim, over the years, I've heard you talk about this McGuire case. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that, Rob, you gave some assistance on that end. Jim, why don't you share with our audience what that case was about?
Yeah, I also just wrote about that in my latest book, and of course Rob has a supporting role in that. But essentially, the New Jersey State Police contact me and say, "Yeah, we have this woman who we think got tired of her husband, and she first drug him, with narcotics of some sort, then shot him, and then cut him up into pieces and put him into plastic bags and suitcases, punched holes in the suitcases."
Matching luggage now.
Matching luggage, of course.
Good evidence.
And drives from central New Jersey somewhere into Delaware, somewhere along the Chesapeake, and somehow in the middle of the night throws these 3 suitcases in. And she thinks she's really smart because she punched holes in the suitcases. They're going to sink because when a body decomposes, it releases different chemicals and gases. And of course, it could possibly. What she did right was punch holes in the suitcases. What she did wrong was not punch holes in the plastic bags in which she wrapped them. So about 2 days, a week after that, 3 suitcases are basically found bobbling in the water by the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. So I don't know any of this at the time. They're found. They find the head. They take a picture, do a reconstruction. Someone recognizes the now missing husband from central New Jersey of Melanie McGuire, and she becomes a suspect. It takes about a year to actually arrest her, but the New Jersey State Police finally do. They're getting all their ducks lined up and everything in that regard. And then all of a sudden, these letters show up. Rob described essentially both of those letters, but certainly one was a pre-offense letter on the windshield in the Hummer case. But other ones, it's like, Rob, if someone only came up with a name for these kind of letters. And I did, and Rob nicely cited me in articles he's written, as well as articles I've written. POMIC is the acronym: Post-Offense Manipulation of Investigation Communication. Lots of syllables, 5 words.
Got to be an FBI agent to love that.
I do.
It was a phenomenon that was happening back in the 90s and 2000s that no one really subscribed to.
That's right.
Or they didn't subscribe to it in terms of giving the name. So it was a POMIC, as I called it, but about 6 or 7 different letters that somehow were finding their way to the media, to police departments, to lawyers, and all claiming that this Melanie McGuire was innocent. Her husband was hit, a mob hit, or some angry girlfriend. So it wasn't even one story. It was different things going back and forth. the state police asked me to look at these letters. I compared them to the known writing. So first of all, I looked at the letters themselves, and my opinion was they were all written by the same person, even though they came across as with different, writing styles, whatever. And then I got the known writings through the state police, a search warrant of Melanie McGuire, and compared those to these poemics, 7 of them, I think, total. And I rendered an opinion they were, in fact, we don't, in linguistics, and Rob and I use a little bit different terminology here, but we don't say she's the one that wrote it. We don't sit on the stand and say that defendant is the one that wrote these letters. At least the sort of the formula that I use is the letters are consistent, inconsistent, or no decision. We said in this case, McGuire, consistent and exceptionally distinctive. So not just consistent that they kind of look alike or, they read alike, but exceptionally distinctive puts it at a very high bar in terms of the odds of it being anyone else are very remote. Anyway, I testified in that in the preliminary hearing, and we knew the defense hired someone who Rob had just gone up against a few times, and she's a linguist and a forensic linguist. And we don't have to get into all the weeds there either, Rob, but there's some kind of tricks that she would do and the same kind of testimony. And Rob kind of saw through her, some of her testimony and her counter reports. And while Rob didn't testify in the McGuire case, he was there to sort of direct the prosecutor eventually in the cross-examination and all.
Right.
So anything you want
to listen to. So another scene is, so I'm driving to New Jersey. I'm on Long Island, and it was really hot, and the traffic was horrendous, and I was sort of queasy. I'm not sure I ate anything yet that day because I wanted to make sure I was on time. And I get there, and I'm greeted by one of the detectives, not Jim. Jim wasn't there, and so the detective welcomes me, and he starts telling me all about the case, and he says that this guy is casting in the Atlantic and he's fishing. And he says to himself, wow, look at this. This was some high level luggage. He says, wow, this is great. Look at that great luggage. And he snags it and he starts pulling it in. And he says, wow, maybe my ship's finally come in. Oh, boy, if nothing else, I have this great suitcase. Let's see what's in it. And it's the torso, okay,
of Mr. McGuire.
And then he goes on in greatest of detail how he found it odd that the nurse didn't know to slice this part of the stomach and that part of the stomach. And I'm queasy and it's like 90 degrees. I'm saying, let me get to the language data, please. I've had enough for today.
You
thought
the night before Woodstock was tough. This was even tougher, it sounds like.
I got to ask you both a question here.
Yeah.
A lot of times when you testify as experts in certain cases, the defense is always going to counter with their own expert.
Not always,
but in many cases, yes.
Like in the case you just talked about in this case here, there was a woman that testified, and I have to ask, was she totally opposite in her conclusions? I don't want to get into the weeds. Or was she consistent with you guys or totally opposite?
Well, this happens a lot. And in this case, what a lot of time other experts will do, they won't even come up with their own opinion about who wrote the letters. They won't even say, no, in this case, Melanie McGuire didn't write these letters. Yeah. In this case, all this other linguist did, and she did wind up testifying in the trial, all she did was attack my methodology, that I didn't use the proper, pi square, statistical formula, whatever. And it's all this mathematical, statistical stuff. And the prosecutor later told me the jury's like sitting there, what? And, she doesn't make any sense to her in that regard or to the jury. And I should also add at this point, it's not my phone. Anyway, this charge that was put on this Melanie McGuire, she had a homicide charge.
Yeah.
But all it was obstruction of justice, which Ray, and Rob, you've learned over the years, it's a process crime. No it's something you have to add in to a crime if some other little event occurred. And really the prosecution's goal in that case was just to have someone with some level of expertise and authority me in this case, describe to the jury somehow these letters and somehow saying where they came from. And although the judge wouldn't let me describe POMIC to the jury, the concept of post-offense manipulation of investigation communications, basically letters written after the fact, usually by the killer, to cover up the crime. And Rob explained it in the Hummer case. And they wouldn't let me use that term because I had not published on it yet, but I'm still explaining the premise of it. And because it was a minor crime, what the prosecutor wanted was the murder one conviction.
Yeah.
And ultimately,
so she did not want them to have something else to find her guilty of.
So the final verdict comes in, and by the way, when the prosecutor told me later she's cross-examining this other linguist, the jury is like, or even when the linguist's initial testimony, they're like bored, they're not even paying attention. Good prosecutors know how to look at them. So she gave like a 10-minute cross to this person and basically ended it. And, 5 days, a week later, the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, except acquitted on the obstruction of justice.
Right.
And this person went online and had a colleague of hers that somehow wrote this paper about a year and a half later. This was a big victory for their methodology of forensic linguistics, as opposed to what I had successfully used in the Unabomb case and dozens of other cases since then. But somehow this was a victory. But it was an outlier in that regard.
I look at you guys.
Just one second. Yet virtually all forensic linguists, even if we don't do things exactly the same, except for this person, we all agree that it's a very, very valid science. And
exactly. So you have these hired guns out there, which kind of sits there, and all they're trying to do is punch holes in your methodology or how you arrived at your decision. They're not punching holes in the decision, just how you arrived at it, which they're not arguing and saying, hey, we don't disagree with what you have. We just don't agree how you got there.
Yeah, now that can be a valid thing, but it can be a very invalid thing. And then, as you guys know very well, a court case is like, I don't know, a Super Bowl football game in terms of strategies. And we don't want to throw too much weight over here because we really want them to decide on the ultimate issue, which in this case was a murder, and they found her guilty.
Yeah, and a good expert, I have no problem being challenged on the stand. Make it legitimate. Don't make stuff up and you change it like every time you testify. You'll testify one way and state something, and this particular person does this, and then a trial 2 years later or a hearing of some sort, it's like the opposite thing is coming forth. So,
but anyway, so look, I know. On. Yeah, it's unfortunate that you get people in all sorts of fields like that. But forensic linguistics, just to go back, is really, and what you said in the beginning, Ray, nobody knows it. I mean, Roger Shy, distinguished research professor at Georgetown, has now published 45, I think it is, books on forensic linguistics, 40 of them with Oxford University Press. Yet the legal world is so enormous that people still are unaware of it. And it has opened up so many doors for me, and I think for you too, Jim. I mean, we were able to do cases that we never would have been able to. And I mean, I wound up at Quantico with you, which I thought was pretty damn cool. And you and I have been, to Amsterdam, and you introduced me to Tammy Gales, who was the co-director of our graduate program now there. We were in Seattle, Barcelona, and then
Amsterdam.
I recruited you to London when, and that's an interesting story, and I can't get into detail, but I was signing up linguists in England for a rapid response linguistics thing, and that had to do with the bombing of the American embassies in Tanzania and Kenya. But in the middle of that, I wound up in a room in a building in London. And the woman who was the head there said to me, I suppose you'd like to know where you are. And I said to myself, was it that obvious? I had no idea. I said, yes. I mean, I knew I had to enter various pods of glass where I was being observed. And I was with this person who had introduced me. And she said, you are in XYZ headquarters. I said, oh, that would explain the metal shutters on the windows and things like that, that would drop down. So to make a long story short, I was asked to create an entire day demonstration of forensic linguistics, forensic phonetics, and I gathered together a whole bunch of people who were there in England and did the presentation. And they said to me, okay, I want you to create a multi-day, what was it, like 5 days training for our people in the run-up to the London Olympics, because we want the maximum intelligence gathering ability from threats and from chatter and everything. Can you do that? I said, yes. And I said, and I know exactly who I am going to invite to do it with me. And it was Jim. So we went over there, and yeah.
And I was fortunate enough to have been assigned to the Athens Olympics in 2004,
Yep.
so I could parlay off of that experience in theater, so to speak, in Athens for the whole time. So it was great to work with you on that training block. It was about a year before they were really taking it serious. And you know what? They did great work. Maybe our training helped a little bit because nothing bad happened during those Olympics.
No, I like to give us full credit, actually.
That's a win, guys. That's a win. Hey, so Rob, I understand that you're doing some work with this Innocence Project.
Yes.
Can you tell our listeners exactly what this Innocence Project is?
Sure.
And how things are going with it?
Well, at Hofstra, we have a forensic linguistics Innocence Project where we re-examine language evidence, which could be threatening calls, threatening messages, threatening letters, interrogations, interviews, witness testimony that put people on death row. And of course, sometimes we find out that everything was valid. But we very often also find out, and I guess that's why we get these cases, that people, I remember watching 7 hours of a videotaped interview, at the end of which the police officer got up and went out of the room and said he went for it. He confessed. Now, I think he really believed he did, but he didn't. There was no confession there, you see. But if you bring a guy in who you think is guilty, it's very easy to just listen to various things. And we started with a confession that was supposedly dictated by a suspect, but clearly was not. And as Jim pointed out to me, and I always teach, it's perfectly possible for people to be helped to confess. And you get a lot of the police officers, okay, I'll go for it and I'll take a plea. All right, so it was 8 o'clock and I turned left on Smith Street. Well, no, you can't make a left on Smith Street at 8 o'clock. Oh, you're right. Must have been right. So when was that? Well, at an unknown time. And you get all these linguistic devices that are used by officers. But then sometimes that's not the case. And in this Chicago case, these guys were doing a lot of bad stuff. There were a lot of court cases against them, and this guy got caught in the middle of it. So that was what we started by a forensic linguistics Innocence Project.
Nice. Yeah.
And only people who can work on it are registered Hofstra students. I must say, people really are very, very much for justice and are always volunteering. And we train a lot of officers, investigators, Mounties, very, very interested in forensic linguistics and the ability to extract intelligence. Jim trains them all the time. I've been training them a lot, and it's just a win-win.
And Rob, I know you well enough that you present this to your students. I've been involved with some other Innocence Project folks, and I sometimes think there's a bit of
leaning one way. Yeah.
Propaganda forming. And all I like to say to the students when I get in front of them is that as any expert, quite frankly, but certainly as a forensic linguist expert, you're not to be a crime fighter, but you're also not to be an advocate for the defendant.
Absolutely.
You have to look right down the middle, objective evidence, follow the evidence, and maybe that your opinion will help. Maybe it will not help. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle. It's cloudy. But I always like to tell people that it's fine to be, a true crime aficionado. It's fine to be
Good advice.
very much Innocence Project, but you got to go in objective. And just because maybe the head of this Innocent Project said this person is innocent doesn't mean he is. The vast majority of people in prison are guilty, and they're there for what they should.
You can't be anti-cop and be a good scientist, and you can't be always pro-cop and be a good scientist.
Exactly.
That's really good advice, guys. Now, Rob, you've been doing this for 4 decades. Give me the most interesting case you ever worked, if you can.
Yeah. Well, I've been a linguist for 4 decades. I've only been doing this for 15 years, but I'm avoiding the answer. I think the Coleman case was pretty heartbreaking because this guy was getting death threats to him, to threats against his employer, and said, have her stop preaching the bullshit. She was a televangelist. If I can't get her, I'll get you. If I can't get you, I'll get your family when you go on tour with her. And there was a series of death threats that came in over a period of several months. And the detective who lived across the street from them put a camera in his son's bedroom, trained on their house, because they were also getting letters in their mailbox to see. So one morning, the guy, Chris Coleman, he goes to the gym at like 6:40 or so. And a little while later, he calls the detective and he says, I can't get my wife on the phone. Go over there. So he went over there, and his 2 little boys and his wife are strangled to death.
Oh, jeez. That's terrible.
And Coleman's story quickly fell apart. The time of death didn't work. He had scratches over his arms where his wife apparently fought back. Of course, the poor little boys didn't fight back. And he was asked if there was any trouble with his marriage. He said no, but they got his phone, and he'd been having this affair all over the world with this ex-friend of his wife's. And that very day that he killed them, he had promised her he was going to a divorce lawyer. And so as horrible as all that is, think about them not knowing. They're good police force, excellent police force. They really knew what they were doing, but they didn't know that maybe if they had gotten Jim or me early on and not treat it just as a threat case, but as a authorship case, or if nothing else, a linguistic demographic profile to narrow the suspect pool who might be sending these notes, we might have discovered that it was the husband, and then the family would still be alive.
Yeah, that breaks my heart to hear that, because there's children involved, and they didn't do anything to anybody. Oh, that's just so sad.
Is that the case? Wasn't there writings on the wall, Rob, that you actually compared?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So not only did he send these letters, but then after he killed them, he had red paint and he scrawled, "You have paid, fuck you," stuff like that, even on one of his sons.
Oh, my God.
So we were able to connect, he couldn't very well. And yeah, so those writings were consistent with the death threats, and they were consistent with his own writing.
So that when you think about things, and that's something that really bothers you, even though you do this for a living, and even law enforcement officers will tell you the one case that bothers them the most, it always comes back to where there's children involved. Always comes back to that. And because we always like to think in this, what Jim and I do is we never want to forget about the victims. The victims are really, really important. And so many times when law enforcement or people look at cases, it's all about the hunt and they forget about the victims. And we never want to do that on this show. But where do you see, Rob? Now, both you and Jim are going to retire soon. Where do you see the future of forensic linguistics? Where do you see that going?
Well, the International Association of Forensic Linguists is growing like mad. There's now an organization in South Africa for Africans. I give talks at the Tamil organization of India. The last big meeting was in the Philippines. Our program that Jim and I teach in has now graduated around 200 people. Some of them have become FBI, CIA, NCIS, Homeland Security, Intelligence.
We should explain that real quick, Rob, the workshop. I started at the FBI. I did 4 of them there.
Of course, yes.
05, 06, 07, and there was no more linguists in the FBI. And Rob came to me, hey, Jim, is there any chance we can move that workshop to Hofstra University? I said, the FBI doesn't own it. I don't own it. Sure. We said, well, Jim, would you come and teach it with me? And we've been doing it ever since, 15 years now.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Outstanding, gentlemen. Well, you guys are the forefathers of a lot of things that are happening with linguistics when you look at it. I mean, you don't want to say, that's kind of deep, but you guys are really the founding fathers of the development of this. Now, there's going to be people coming after you that are going to expand it, but you guys really got this thing off the ground, and you both should be congratulated on that. You really should, because that's a lot of great work, and it's been really, really helpful to law enforcement as well.
Well, that's nice to say. I think people like Roger Shai in the U.S. and Malcolm Coulthard in the U.K. are definitely ahead of us, but we picked up the ball and ran with it, and they're still out there working. So and we came upon it from different perspectives. Me already in law enforcement, not a linguist, but the trial by fire with Unabomb, and then we took it to that next level. So, and we also wanted to get it out in the public. And there's a few linguists over the years. Oh, this Fitzgerald guy has his website, and he had this mini series Manhunt Unabomber. But I saw that as a very positive thing about the FBI, first of all, but also about forensic linguistics. If we can get out there, Rob's been in a book or two as a character, a novel, actually a rock and roller turned linguist. Is the what book is that again, Rob?
Bones to Ashes. Kathy writes, who is the originator of the TV show Bones, because she's actually a forensic anthropologist, just like we're actually linguists.
Right. Outstanding.
So if you can get this stuff out there, get this stuff out in the media, which we're doing, of course, now, and the other sites, and not the charlatan stuff.
That's
real
right.
Stuff.
And my brother, who invented Sha Na Na, and also is a fabulous novelist and has always had great reviews and has sold all his books to Imagine Studios. He and I now, after 7 years, have finally finished a trilogy, which is 1,200 pages.
Wow.
In which the main character is, oddly enough, a forensic linguist and gets involved with all sorts of counterterrorism and things like that, based on a lot of what I learned, like from Jim and everybody at Quantico. And we have a fabulous agent, Rose DeMola, who was the agent for the Hunger Games books.
Oh. Do you have a name or a publication date coming up? Title of the book?
No, she's shopping it now to publishers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, understand.
Well, when it's released, you'll come back on.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Talk about that. I'd love to hear that. I'd love to hear all about it. I like to read it first and then hear all about it, how you got to that.
1,200 pages. You got to settle in.
Well, yeah, I don't mind doing that. I love to read, Rob.
That's
I love
great.
to read.
I know you do, Ray. I know. You've said it many times on the show, and it's great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've had you here for over an hour, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, Rob. I mean, is there anything that you have that you want to lay on our audience, some advice or anything of that nature?
People who are really interested in forensic science and, well, true crime, I guess, and justice. I mean, as Jim and I have learned, forensic linguistics really opens the door to scientific analysis of things that wasn't possible before. I remember very clearly one time Jim and I gave a presentation, maybe it was on Ellis Island, and a detective came up and said, it never occurred to me that we could use language to solve a case, because we have this cold case, and there were letters at the scene, but it never occurred to me that it could be of use. Could you guys take a look at it? And so that's what we need to spread the word, because there is a lot of intelligence, there's a lot of content in language evidence that is not being utilized now.
Yeah,
so at Hofstra, we're the only, face-to-face, I should say. Jim at Penn West has an MA in forensic linguistics, and we have a 2-year MA in linguistics, forensic linguistics, that also teaches for phonetics, phonology, and everything. And that my students are required to work on live cases, both in our Forensic Linguistics Innocence Project. And a couple of years ago, these investigators came to us. They were tracking a serial killer across the American South and wanted our help. So my interns, all Hofstra students, and I spent around 8 months working on that. This woman was apparently marrying veterans and depleting their resources, claiming she had kids that she didn't have, getting money out of the Veterans Administration, and then staging their suicides. And we showed that she had written the suicide note of one of them.
Outstanding. Oh, that's great. I love hearing that. That's great news. And had they not come to you, they'd still be looking.
That's right. Exactly. They thought so, but they had no proof. So we have a 5-year BAMA where you get to count graduate courses for your BA as well. And then we have our MA, and we have the Institute that Jim and I are co-directors of, and then the Forensic Linguistics Innocence Project. So Hofstra is a hotbed of forensic linguistics, and our friends over at Aston in the UK are the other hotbed.
And Penn West University.
I said, I love Penn West.
Yeah.
Now we have Mark Visona from Penn West, Georgetown, has joined us at Hofstra.
Well, Jim, you have anything you want to add before we close out?
No, just it's been a pleasure all these years knowing you, Rob. My last story about Rob is this. I think the first time I came to Hofstra was 2008 to teach. And I think the first time I may have stayed in the dorms or something, which wasn't the best experience. It was summertime, so they weren't crowded. But I think one of those nights we went to your house and your family was there. And I remember I walked in the door and you pulled me aside and your 4 kids were there. I think all 4 of them. And they said, "Oh, Jim, they can't wait to meet you. FBI profiler, forensic linguist, work on the TV show Criminal Minds. They think you're a real rock star." And I looked at Rob. I said, "Wait a minute. Do they know their father was an actual rock star?" Yeah, but that's different. So come on in. And the kids are all sitting around me asking all these questions. So it's interesting how life and kids look up to other people, and everything is relative in terms of what even the word rock star means. But that's why we're linguists, right, Rob? We help figure those things out.
You got it, Jim. Very good.
That's great. Well, hey, listen, that's going to be a wrap for this show, everybody. We thank you for turning in, and make sure you subscribe to Code Red Podcast and follow us on all Code Red Podcast social media platforms. We'll see you next week with another special guest. Until next time, stay safe and be aware of your surroundings. Goodbye, everyone.
Take care, Ray. Bye, Jim.
See ya.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for everything.